The storm came down like a wounded creature that night, crawling across the plains with a low moan that only lonely hearts could hear. Rain fell in silver needles, stitching the darkness together. And through that trembling curtain of water walked Iloan Greyfeather, 28 years old, soaked to the bone, her shame hanging around her like her wet, heavy hair. She carried almost nothing, just a small deerskin pouch pressed her chest, the last piece of a life that felt like it had slipped away from her fingers. Each step toward the distant cabin light felt like a confession. Earlier that day, the town had laughed at her again. Martha Pike whispering that she was a stray with no tribe left, Sheriff Brant Kessler tapping the badge on his chest, as if its shine alone proved she didn't belong. Their words stuck to her like mud, dragging at her feet as she walked. Tonight, she wasn't running from the rain. She was running from humiliation, from the ache of being unwanted in every place she tried to stand. Inside the cabin, Cole Maddox, 30 years old and made of quiet steadiness, crouched by a low fire. His face carried the marks of days spent alone, soft around the eyes, hard around the jaw, the kind of man storms respected because he didn't flinch when they came. When he heard her footsteps, he didn't reach for his gun. He heard the exhaustion in the rhythm. He heard the plea carried in the weight of each step. Iloan reached his door and hesitated. Her hand hovered near the wood, as if invisible hands were pulling her back. Rain ran down her cheeks, water or tears, even she didn't know. When she finally knocked, it was barely a sound at all. Cole opened the door. Time held its breath. Lightning cracked behind her, firelight glowed behind him. A woman standing in the rain, trembling with shame. A man standing in warmth, steady as the land he lived on. She whispered, the words almost stolen by the storm. Please, just one night. I won't trouble you. Shame bent her posture. Her eyes looked anywhere but at him. Cole didn't question her, didn't make her explain her wounds. He simply stepped aside, gentle as a man, placing a lantern near someone lost in the dark. He lowered his head in a small gesture, respect, not pity, and let her in. Inside, the warmth of the fire wrapped around her like something she didn't think she deserved. Iloan sat near it, not too close, careful not to take what wasn't meant for her. Steam rose from her soaked dress. Cole set a wool blanket over her shoulders without brushing against her skin. He placed a warm tin cup of coffee before her, then stepped back, giving her the space she needed to breathe. They didn't speak much. Silence was safer. Silence was gentle. The fire crackled softly. The rain whispered on the roof, and something small, something fragile, began to grow between them. Not love, not yet, but the faintest glimmer of human connection, like embers drifting toward one another in the dark. The next morning, the sky was washed clean, cold as river stones. Iloan stepped outside, breathing deep as if the storm had rinsed a piece of her spirit. Cole saddled his horse, moving with that same steady quiet that made people trust him without meaning to. He asked her with just a nod if she wanted to ride into town. She hesitated, then agreed. But the town did what towns always do. It watched, it whispered, it judged. Martha Pike's eyes narrowed like a hawk spotting small prey. Sheriff Kessler's gaze held the cold certainty of a man who expected trouble from her simply for existing. Words floated behind their backs like drifting smoke. Stray, burden, trouble. Iloan felt it all. Every whisper, every stare. The weight returned, settling over her shoulders heavier than the rain ever had. Back at the cabin, Cole noticed her silence thickening again. He didn't pry. Instead, he handed her a strip of dried meat and said only, "Eat. You'll think clearer with strength." It wasn't just food. It was permission to exist. Permission to rest. That evening, when the sun slipped behind the distant ridges, painting the world in bruised purple and gold, Iloan stood outdoors with the wind tugging at her damp hair. She looked out at the open land as if trying to understand where she belonged in it. Cole stood behind her, not close enough to touch, not far enough to feel absent. The storm outside had passed, but the one inside her was only beginning to quiet. In the days that followed, something soft began to settle between them. Something made not of words, but of gestures, of two lonely lives learning the shape of company again. The Lowen started helping around the cabin without being asked. She swept dust from corners long ignored, mended a torn blanket with quiet skill, gathered firewood with the careful strength of someone who had learned not to waste anything. Not breath, not warmth, not hope. Cole watched her with a steadiness that never pressed, never intruded. Sometimes, when the morning sun slid across the wooden floor, she caught him glancing her way with that gentle kind of curiosity that made her chest warm. Once, when his horse nudged her shoulder playfully, she let out a small laugh, surprised, soft, a sound that seemed to take even her off guard. Cole paused in his work at the sound, looking at her as though he had just witnessed a wildflower bloom in the middle of a long winter. The silence that once sat heavy now rested easy, no longer a wall, but a shared space. Their quiet rhythm broke the day. Sheriff Brant Kessler rode up to the cabin, dust rising behind him like a warning. The Lowen froze when she saw him, instinct curling her inward. The sheriff dismounted slowly, the kind of slow that meant power. He said a merchant was missing jewelry. He said tracks led near this land. He said a Lowen had been seen in town. And then he said what she'd feared all along. That woman's trouble. Always has been. Martha Pike appeared beside him on horseback, face pinched with the pleasure of accusation. She wove her story with poison-laced certainty, claiming she'd seen a Lowen lurking near the store. Shame hit a Lowen so hard she felt herself shrink. Her throat tightened until breathing hurt. She couldn't even deny it. Her voice had deserted her, the same way everyone else once had. Then Cole stepped forward, not aggressively, not angrily, just firmly, like a man planting his feet before a storm. She was with me, he said, calm, unshaken, all night. You know that. The sheriff raised an eyebrow. You vouching for her? That's risky. Folks are already talking. Cole didn't blink. Let them. That simple sentence knocked the air from Alone's lungs. No one had ever risked a single word for her before. Not a defense, not a shield, not even a moment of belief. But Cole did more. He stood in front of her as if the world's judgment meant nothing compared to her right to be treated justly. The sheriff left, but the dust he stirred hung in the air long after. That night, Iloan packed quietly, heart pounding in her ribs like a frightened animal. She couldn't pull Cole in her pain, couldn't burden him with the trouble she was certain would only grow worse. Before dawn, she slipped outside toward the stable, tightening the straps of her worn satchel with trembling hands. Cole found her there, shadows soft around them. You leaving? He asked, voice low. She didn't look at him. Shame was a weight too heavy to turn under. I shouldn't be here, she whispered. Your life was steady before I came. I don't want to ruin it. Cole took a step closer, the sound of rain from the roof, above them a soft drum. Iloan, he said, voice steadier than the dawn light. My life was empty before you came. Those words were a lantern held gently in the dark. She lifted her eyes, slowly, cautiously, and what she saw in his expression wasn't pity or pressure. It was something quieter, something patient, something that looked a little like hope. But they had no time to rest in it. Sheriff Kessler returned with a posse, riding fast enough to kick up a cloud that swallowed the horizon behind them. They came with rope, irons, and certainty. The sheriff dismounted and reached for Iloan as if the truth no longer mattered. Cole stepped in front of her. Don't, he said. The sheriff's hand went to his gun. In the space of a heartbeat, the whole world shifted. Cole knocked the weapon aside, sending it into the dust. The posse surged forward. Cole fought with a protective fury, not wild, not reckless, controlled, like a man defending something sacred. Iloan trembled, watching the chaos, until her fingers brushed against the fallen gun. She lifted it with shaking hands. A single shot cracked into the sky. Not anyone, just enough to stop the world. Stop, she cried, the strength in her voice surprising even herself. Silence flooded the clearing. Then, through the hush, the merchant and his young son arrived on horseback. Sweat ran down the boy's face as he pointed straight at Martha Pike. She took the jewelry, he said breathlessly. I saw her hide it under a shawl. Martha stuttered, paled, tried to turn her horse away, but the truth chased her faster than any posse ever could. Shame, Real shame finally settled on her shoulders. The sheriff looked down, defeated. Not at Aloan, but at his own blindness. Cole stepped back to her side, chest rising with heavy breaths, dirt streaking his hands. Aloan looked up at him, really looked, and felt something shift deep inside her. For the first time, the world didn't tilt against her. It tilted toward her. Later, they returned to the cabin at sunset. The sky burned gold and rose, soft as worn leather. Aloan sank onto the wooden steps, exhaustion and relief resting on her shoulders like twin weights. Cole sat beside her, not touching her, waiting for her to choose the space between them. "Why did you stand up for me?" she asked quietly. "I'm no one." Cole shook his head slowly. "You're someone who deserved respect long before you came to my door." A long stillness followed, a gentle one. Then Aloan leaned her head against his shoulder. Not a confession, not a promise, just a beginning. A breath of belonging. A quiet spark of something that would take its time to grow. And if you, somewhere far from the dust of that old cabin, ever feel cast out by the world, remember this. Sometimes all it takes is one open door, one steady hand, one soul willing to stand with you in the storm. To remind you that you were worthy long before anyone else believed it.